At 23,000 feet above central Germany, on the morning of March 6, 1944, the sky was trying to kill Staff Sergeant Harold Briggs. It had been trying since they crossed the Dutch coast. Briggs was 20 years old, a former ranch hand from the high plains of eastern Colorado, the kind of young man who had grown up fixing fence lines in January blizzards and driving cattle through summer thunderstorms. The Army Air Forces found him in 1942, handed him a pair of machine guns, and put him in the loneliest seat in the United States military, the tail gunner. On a B-17 Flying Fortress, the tail gunner sat at the very back of the aircraft, separated from the rest of his 9 crewmates by 40 feet of aluminum fuselage, bomb bays, and equipment. His office was roughly the size of a phone booth. His company was 2 Browning M2 machine guns, and whatever the Luftwaffe decided to send at him that day. The tail was the most attacked position on any American heavy bomber. German fighter pilots had learned early in the war that a head-on or side pass brought them through a wall of defensive fire. From directly behind, only one man stood between a Messerschmitt pilot and a clean, killing shot. That man was always the tail gunner. The mission on March 6, 1944, was Berlin, the first American daylight bombing raid on the German capital. The 8th Air Force sent nearly 700 bombers that morning. It would become one of the costliest single days in the history of American strategic bombing. 69 B-17s would not return to England. Briggs flew in the tail of a B-17G his crew had named Columbine Fury, after the Colorado State flower and the general mood of anyone who had to fly deep into Germany. The name was stenciled in yellow letters just below the tailgun position, which meant Briggs looked at it upside down every time he climbed to his station. He thought that was fitting. The formation crossed into German airspace at 0920 hours. Anti-aircraft fire opened up almost immediately, thick black bursts of flak appearing in clusters ahead of them, beside them, below them. The bombers had to fly straight and level. They could not maneuver, could not dodge, could not do anything but hold formation and let the statistics play out. Briggs had flown 14 missions. He needed 25 to go home. The math was not encouraging. The fighters found them 40 miles east of Hanover. FW-190s, coming out of the east with the sun behind them. A textbook intercept that gave the German pilots a blinding advantage and gave the Americans almost no warning. Briggs heard the call over the intercom from the ball turret gunner beneath the aircraft. "Fighters, 6 o'clock low, a dozen of them, coming fast." Briggs pressed his face against the gun sight and waited. The first pass came within seconds. 3 FW-190s in a line, diving from above and behind. Briggs opened fire. The twin 50s roared and shook the compartments so hard his vision blurred. Tracer rounds arced out in long orange lines. The lead fighter pulled away. The second one took hits across its nose cowling and broke left, trailing a thin ribbon of gray smoke. The third one did not pull away in time. Briggs walked his fire directly into the cockpit. The FW-190 nosed over and fell out of the sky without ever pulling the trigger. His hands were shaking. He did not stop firing. For the next 22 minutes, Columbine Fury fought its way through a running battle over central Germany. Briggs lost count of the fighter passes. The intercom became a chaos of shouted warnings, pain, and static. The ball turret gunner went silent after the third pass. One of the waist gunners reported he'd been hit in the shoulder. The co-pilot's voice disappeared from the intercom and never came back. Columbine Fury was bleeding. Number 3 engine had taken a 20mm cannon shell, and the propeller was windmilling uselessly. The bomber slowed. It began to fall behind the formation. A crippled B-17 alone over Germany was a death sentence. Every fighter in the area would converge on it. They did. 8 fighters took turns attacking Columbine Fury over the next several minutes. They worked in pairs, one drawing fire while the other lined up a shot, a tactic German pilots had refined over 4 years of war. Briggs tracked them as best he could, swinging his guns from target to target, firing in short bursts the way he'd been trained. Short bursts. Don't overheat the barrels. Keep shooting. Then the cannon shells found the tail. The first burst took out a section of the horizontal stabilizer. The second burst punched through the fuselage wall 6 inches from Briggs's left arm, filling the compartment with jagged aluminum fragments and winds so cold it felt like being hit with a board. The third burst, the one that changed everything, struck the fuselage directly behind the bomb bay. Columbine Fury cracked. Not in half, not instantly. But the main spar had been compromised, and under the stress of flight, the fuselage began to open like a wound. Briggs felt it, a deep vibration that moved through the airframe like a shudder. Different from flak, different from turbulence. He had heard other airmen describe it, and he'd hoped he never would himself. The sound of an airplane that was no longer going to make it home. The forward section, cockpit, bomb bays, the front half of the crew, separated first. Briggs watched it go. One moment, the fuselage was ahead of him, and then it simply was not. A wall of freezing air hit him. The tail section rotated. He could see the front half of Columbine Fury tumbling away below him, engine still running, turning slowly in the thin air like something confused about what came next. He was alone. 23,000 feet. No parachute. His had been shredded by shrapnel in the second pass. The tail section of a B-17 weighs approximately 3,000 pounds and is shaped, loosely, like a cross. Horizontal stabilizers, vertical stabilizer. The aerodynamic resistance of those surfaces does something that a falling human body cannot do on its own. It slows the fall. Not enough to survive a direct impact, but enough to buy time. Briggs did not curl into a ball. He did not close his eyes. He did not pray, though he would later say he probably should have. He grabbed the gun handles. The tail section was spinning slowly. The ground was coming up. His arms were cut from shrapnel, bleeding through his flight suit. He could not tell how high he was or how long he had. He could tell that 2 FW-190s were still circling the wreckage. He pointed the guns at the nearest one and opened fire. The German pilot broke off immediately. He would later be interviewed by Luftwaffe intelligence officers who struggled to write up his account without sounding as though they were reporting a hallucination. A piece of wreckage falling from 20,000 feet had shot at him. He had dodged. The second fighter made one more pass at the tail section, took hits from Briggs's guns, and did not make a third. The tail section struck the forest canopy at approximately 90 miles per hour. The pine trees did what pine trees do. They gave. Branches snapped, trunks bent and cracked. The stabilizers caught on the upper canopy like a crude arresting hook, tearing away but absorbing momentum in the process. The main body of the tail section cartwheeled through the upper branches, struck a heavy trunk, bounced left, struck another, and came to rest on the frozen forest floor. Briggs was inside it, alive. Both forearms were broken. 3 ribs were cracked. He had a deep laceration across his left thigh from a shrapnel fragment he hadn't felt until that moment. His head had struck the steel framework during the impact, and blood was running freely down his face from a cut above his hairline. He could see the gray German sky through the holes in the fuselage above him. He could hear his own breathing. He was alive. The voices came within 20 minutes. German. Military. Moving through the trees toward the crash site. Briggs could not stand. He could not effectively move his arms. He lay in the wreckage of Columbine Fury's tail section and waited for whatever came next. The first German soldier who found him stopped several feet away and stared. He was young, younger than Briggs maybe, and he looked at the wreckage, and then at the American, and then back at the wreckage, apparently working through the arithmetic of how a man could have arrived here from up there. A German officer arrived within the hour. He examined Briggs's wounds, examined the parachute, torn to ribbons by shrapnel, and examined the wreckage. His German was too fast for Briggs to follow, but his expression was clear enough. The officer gestured at the sky, and then at the American, and shook his head slowly. He gave an order. A cart was brought up. Briggs was loaded onto it without ceremony, but also, notably, without cruelty. He was a prisoner of war, and German military protocols, at least in early 1944, still generally applied. He passed out before the cart reached the road. Briggs spent the next 4 days in a German military field hospital. He was not a priority patient. German soldiers and civilians occupied every doctor's attention, and an American airman who had just bombed their country ranked near the bottom of the triage list. His wounds were cleaned, adequately, not gently, and his arms were splinted. He was given water. That was approximately all. The infection arrived on the second day. His temperature climbed. He drifted. He would surface occasionally, aware of the sounds of the ward around him. Other men in pain, a clock on the wall, occasional German voices, and then drift back under. On the fourth day, a captured Polish physician named Dr. Anatol Wronski appeared at his bedside. Wronski had been a military surgeon before the German occupation. He had been pressed into service treating prisoners of war because German medical staff had more than enough of their own casualties to handle. He was not supposed to do more than basic wound management on enemy prisoners. He did considerably more. The surgery took 5 hours. Wronski worked with instruments that belonged in a field kit and a supply of anesthesia that ran out 90 minutes in. Briggs gripped the side rails of the operating table and did not scream, which Wronski would later describe in his own post-war memoirs as the most stubborn thing he had ever witnessed from a patient. He set the broken bones, cleaned the infected tissue, sutured the laceration on Briggs's thigh, and closed the head wound with careful stitching that held against all reasonable odds. When it was over, Wronski told Briggs the truth in careful, accented English. "The next few days will decide. I have done what I can. The rest is yours." The fever peaked on the second night after surgery. Briggs's temperature reached 104 degrees and stayed there for 11 hours. Wronski checked on him 4 times through the night. He had no antibiotics to give. He could only change the compresses and watch. At 04:30 on the third morning, the fever broke. Briggs woke up hungry. Wronski, passing through the ward, noticed the American was sitting up and looking around. He said nothing. He simply nodded and kept walking. That nod meant Briggs was going to live. 6 weeks later, Briggs was transferred to Stalag Luft 3 in Sagan, the same camp where the famous Great Escape had occurred just weeks before his arrival. The escape had resulted in the murder of 50 of the recaptured men by the Gestapo, and the camp was locked down under far stricter conditions than before. There would be no escaping. There would only be enduring. Briggs spent 8 months at Stalag Luft 3 and a subsequent camp. The rations were thin: black bread, watery soup, occasional potatoes. The cold crept through the barracks walls from October onward. Red Cross packages arrived sporadically and were the difference between slow starvation and something marginally above it. He kept his mind occupied the way prisoners do. He helped build a secret radio. He took a course in celestial navigation taught by a captured RAF flight lieutenant. He learned 60 words of Polish from another prisoner who had spent time in Warsaw before the war. He did not think too much about the ranch in Colorado or what the sky looked like when you were inside it, by choice. In January 1945, the Soviet advance from the east reached a critical point. German camp commanders received orders to evacuate. All prisoners were to march west. The announcement came at night, without warning, in the middle of one of the coldest winters Central Europe had seen in 30 years. The temperature was 17 below zero. The men had 2 hours to gather what they could carry and form columns. What followed would be called, by those who survived it, the Long March, or the Black March, or simply the March. A word that, for the rest of their lives, those men would say with a particular weight that other words did not carry. Briggs walked west in a column of several thousand Allied airmen. German guards marched alongside with rifles. The road was packed snow and ice. The temperature did not rise above 0 for the first 2 weeks. Men wore every piece of clothing they owned in layers, and still the cold got through. Briggs's broken arms had healed, improperly, in ways that ached in cold weather. The cracked ribs from the crash had knit together, but still caught on sharp inhales. The head wound had closed under Vronsky's careful stitching, but cold weather seemed to find the scar with special accuracy. He walked anyway. He had not survived a 23,000-foot fall to die on a German road. Men fell around him. Some got up, some did not. Guards made the calculation each time. Briggs did not look back. He had learned, somewhere in the last 14 months, that looking back was a thing that killed you. He put one foot in front of the other. He counted his steps. He counted from 1 to 100, then started again. The march covered approximately 500 miles over 83 days. Men died of pneumonia, exhaustion, dysentery, and exposure. An estimated 1,500 Allied prisoners perished before the march ended. Briggs was not among them. On April 23, 1945, the column was intercepted by an advance unit of the American Third Army near the Elbe River. The German guards looked at the approaching American soldiers, looked at their rifles, and put their own weapons on the ground. The prisoners stood in the road and did not entirely understand what was happening. Then it landed. It was over. Staff Sergeant Harold Briggs weighed 91 pounds when he was liberated. He had left Colorado at 162. The Army doctors who examined him documented his injuries and their histories with the particular language of military medicine: fractures, secondary infections, residual trauma, scarring consistent with shrapnel, evidence of prior skull laceration. His record noted that he had survived a structural failure of his aircraft at approximately 23,000 feet without a functional parachute. A doctor reading the file asked him directly, "How are you still here?" Briggs considered the question. "Kept moving," he said. "Never stopped." He returned to Colorado in the late summer of 1945. The ranch was still there. The mountains were still there. The sky was still the wide, indifferent Colorado sky he had grown up under. He did not fly again. Not recreationally, not commercially, not in any context that put him voluntarily inside an aircraft. That part of his life was over, and he knew it, completely. What Harold Briggs did do, what he spent the rest of a long and quiet life doing, was work. He rebuilt the ranch. He married a woman from the next county over who knew nothing about the war and asked about it only once, received an answer that took 45 minutes and left her in tears, and never asked again. He raised 4 children. He lived to 87 years old. He outlived every member of Columbine Fury's crew except one, the navigator, who had bailed out over Germany and spent the rest of the war in a different camp. They wrote letters for decades. They met once, in 1987, at a reunion of 8th Air Force veterans in Washington, D.C. They shook hands and did not say much. They did not need to. The tailgunner position on a B-17 Flying Fortress was the loneliest spot on the aircraft. 40 feet of fuselage separated him from his crew. His field of fire covered the bomber's most vulnerable angle. German fighter pilots attacked from directly behind because a well-aimed pass from 6 o'clock put them in the sights of one man, and only one man. In the entire war, the 8th Air Force lost over 26,000 men killed in action. Tailgunners were among the most decorated and most mourned of all. Harold Briggs survived a fall of over 4 miles. He survived captivity, surgery with no anesthesia, fever, a hell ship crossing, 83 days of forced march through a German winter, He survived because he never stopped moving. He counted to 100 and started again, all the way down, all the way home.